Hello and welcome to James's Wrestling Shoot Interviews, episode 2 or 3, or whichever sort of order this is going in. I told you balls it up straight away, but I'm going to plough straight through my guest this week. Justin Credible, some call him. PJ Walker, he wrestled as occasionally. Aldo Montoya in the WWF, but PJ Polaco, we shall call him today, which is his name, of course. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, my friend. How are you doing today?
Uh, if you want the real answer, I have had food poisoning all day.
Oh my goodness, that's the worst.
Yeah, dude, I got a prawn vindaloo last night. So the hottest curry, and if that doesn't get you, it's going to be the fish.
Ooh, yeah.
But yeah, I'm doing all right then.
Okay.
But thanks for joining us. I know the weather's all bad, and we've struggled to get on the last few hours. And I'm sort of going to spring this on you straight away. Is I can either ask you about all the modern wrestling, or as I showed you just before, I wrote 4 pages worth of questions all about your WWF tenure, 92, 93 to 97. So it's entirely up to you which ones I ask, or which you'd be more interested
It's
in.
all up to you, man. Let's just have some fun. Let's have some fun. Whatever you like.
Right, so I know with Vince Russo you do a bit of an AEW show, a bit of a review show on Fridays as well, so there's a bit of a cheap plug going there. I myself haven't watched much AEW, but I was wondering, in your opinion, as a former pro wrestler for however many decades, I suppose, at this point, where are they going right, where are they going wrong? Much detail as you can. What impresses you, what doesn't impress you, from the production to the wrestlers and all that?
Well, I mean, they're first off, they're on TNT, which is probably one of the best networks that we have here in America on cable, and they've had a ton of publicity from and support from the network. And that's also where WCW had Monday Nitro. So there's a lot of retro feeling to the show. From a production standpoint, they do a wonderful job. I mean, it looks like a great production. It really reminds me of, again, WCW with the fireworks and all that. But what they lack is just complete, in my opinion, just complete lack of storyline. It's almost comical today to see how the talent is as far as it was 20, 30 years ago. And what I mean by that is, a lot of the young men that are doing this, and I don't say women because I'm going at the size part of it, they're like 150 pounds soaking wet. They don't look like athletes, although they do incredible flips and spots like that and stuff like that, but they're just not they don't look like wrestlers. For me, pro wrestling was always like fantasy storytelling, from a male perspective. And back in the day, I used to love, the Hulk Hogan's of the world for a reason. The Ultimate Warriors, they were larger than life, comic book almost stature. And today, it's just like they look like my 20-year-old son with tights. Not very scary. Doesn't look like if you got into a bar fight with them, it would be much of a problem to handle. It's just the aesthetic of visuals for me is the biggest problem. And instead of storytelling, I just feel like these young men and women are just they're putting spots and acrobatics instead of storytelling, which is a big deal for me. I mean, I know what I watch because I've done it for close to 30 years is a work. It's not real. But at the same extent, you want to suspend your belief, and you want to believe that the 2 hours you're watching, that this could be a real fight or something along those lines. And it to me, I'll use the F word, fake, which none of us in wrestling like to use. And a lot of it looks really fake. And that's a huge problem for not just me, but I think a lot of people have the same gripe that watch it on a weekly basis. And it's a shame because they have the money. They have the capabilities to really do something special here. And I've reviewed every single show since its inception. Unfortunately, I just think that they're not willing to change, and they're quite happy with what they're doing, which is fine. But the ratings prove otherwise. They've been quite dismal.
So do you think I mean, I've sort of heard this. Is it sort of indie on the big screen? Is it independent wrestling on the big screen?
That's the best thing I could possibly say is it is. And I know a lot of these guys and gals come from the independent scene. A lot of them, have been wrestling for a long time. A lot of them I've never heard of, but they are, indie darlings, let's say. And it really is. They're just not ready for prime time. One thing Vince McMahon and the WWE have always done, at least for me as a viewer, is put out the best talent, ready for TV. And I just feel like these guys that are out there today in AEW, very few have the pedigree that it takes to be on national television. I don't think they understand the actual worth, how precious it is to get TV time. And I just mentioned it today to someone I was talking to about AEW. It's like, to be on WWE TV was a huge deal and is a huge deal. And also to be on AEW is a huge deal because you're on network television worldwide in some cases, and you're just not getting that, or taking that opportunity, I should say, to get yourself over with the crowd and with people at home. It's just something isn't connecting, and I don't know what it is, but it's certainly not connecting to the fullest that it could, at least.
So, obviously, there's all good and all bad. I know, like, the overall presentation isn't quite to your taste, of course. But I mean, are there any MVPs, most valuable players, that you think, if you were in charge, I'd have these three on top? I'll just throw one name out there. I've seen Brian Cage, and just from looks alone, I think he would pull my head off and bowl it down the street with no thoughts.
I agree. I mean, they definitely have some great guys and some great talent. Brian Cage being one of them, Lance Archer being another one too. And it's what you said. It's like the way they look like superstars. And we need to remember that this is pro wrestling. And look, AEW they've got their core audience. Their core audience tunes in every week. I would assume and imagine that the executives would want to, okay, we got our 750,000 weekly viewers. Now let's expand to, fans that may not be hardcore fans, just, casual viewers, casual fans. And they are out there, on a Wednesday night, there's not a ton of stuff out there unless it's sports orientated, which right now there are no real other sports other than maybe basketball, but they're just not doing so. They have actually slowly declined instead of, or declined instead of inclined on the ratings. They started off with in the 1.1 or 2 million viewers per week, and it's slowly gone down. Only once in a while they crack that 900 to, close to 1 million viewers. So it's a bigger issue, and they're just. I feel that their problem is they don't have direction. I watch this show every week, and I still don't know some of the major tag teams because they'll go on hiatus. You see them once, weeks they won't be back. And if I have to do that much research and I watch it every week, it's telling me that they're not doing a good job of presenting it to the fans in just a basic manner, in a way that regular people, not just wrestling people, could understand it. And I think that's where they missed the boat.
Do you think the Legends? I've written a sort of list here. We've got Sting, Taz, Chris Jericho, your old trainer, I believe it was your old trainer. Arn, Anderson, Tully, Blanchard, Jim Ross, and then Celebrity, Snoop Dogg, Mike Tyson, Shaq. Do you reckon that's the way to go? Or I'll be very specific here. I know your old boss, Paul Heyman, was very much a fan of one legend per territory. That's it. Where's the sweet spot for you?
I mean, it depends who they are. It really depends who they are and what they bring to the table. But I do agree that it needs to be a new generation of stars. I think Chris Jericho has done amazing things for the company, especially in the beginning. But in the past year or so, it's like I feel like they got what they could out of him. They just haven't been very creative with him. Sting, I think, is still very much untapped in AEW. He's come out for a couple of interviews. Only recently, the last episode, he took a power bomb, which I was very surprised at age 61 from Brian Cage. So yeah, I mean, I would keep it on the low end of legends used, but still, I think they're still at the point of passing the torch. Now, if you're bringing in legends to pass the torch, I don't see a problem with it. But to have them on the upper end of the card, it becomes a problem like the WWE is having, where they're bringing in the Goldbergs and the Edges. And then the reason they do that is because the talent that they are using, maybe not the talent's fault, but the company's fault, that they're probably not doing enough for what it takes to get them over. So they have to rely on guys from the past, and that's a huge problem that both companies are having right now. And I don't know how you get out of that, because it doesn't seem like anybody's really connecting. I don't know if it's just a sign of the times. I'd hate to say that it's the wrestlers themselves, because there's so many great talented people out there. So I don't want to say it's them, but you have to wonder kind of what has to be done here, and I don't have the answers, but I would imagine that with so much great talent, they have to find a blend and a good mix of both legends and the new cast of characters.
So in PJ Polaco's AEW, let's say you're the boss, does Kenny Omega hold the main championship?
Yeah, sure. I think he's pretty well regarded as the best in the world, and whether he is or isn't, he's certainly up there in the top 5. I don't know who would be better, but and I think I think the biggest problem that they have is they do have a great heavyweight title blend. Like they have John Moxley, who is very much has the everything that a world champion should have. Kenny Omega as well, and then kind of it drops off quite a bit. Who else do they really have? Lance Archer, who I love just from a look. I always mention his name. He was New Japan U.S. champion and had a great career over there. But in AEW, it just seems like at times they don't know what to do with him. But just from his stature, I mean, he's like 6'5", 6'6", 275 pounds, and he looks like a killer. So I would like to see him in the mix. Brian Cage as well. And another thing I have to say about that is, the faction he's in with Taz and that group. Taz is such a good talker that I feel that he's, overshadowing guys like Brian Cage. I feel like, they should probably do something more that focuses more on those guys instead of him looking like a sidekick. And that's, the problem I have there. But yeah, their heavyweight title picture looks great to me. It's it goes from, kind of to the Darby Allins down. It's like, we don't know who's who. Adam Page is being kind of squandered in the mid card. Matt Hardy the same way. So I don't know. It's very hit and miss with them. And I think they haven't figured it out yet where the shows should be more like real life, because it is proven in a way that the fans are more interested in the backstage stuff and, what's going on behind the scenes. And ECW at one point had an idea of almost a reality show based thing right before it went out of business, when we were looking for a home for our program on cable. And Paul Heyman came up with an idea of almost like making it like a real world MTV style show, like before the matches, kind of going from the hotel to the arenas, showing all of that, and then actually showing the matches. And I think it's probably time that the way we present shows on television starts to drastically change, because I think if we spent more time doing that and not letting the apple fall too far from the tree as far as reality, within a reasonable sense, of course, not getting too personal, I think it would suit everyone better, because sometimes we try to go in and out of, what's real and what's, being worked. But all it ends up doing is confusing fans. So it should all just kind of be, fans already know. So just give them what they know, like completely do an overhaul of what pro wrestling is and show it from every aspect. I mean, do you kill the magic if you show guys talking their matches over? I don't know, but we seem to be, as fans, more interested in that. And perhaps that's the new reality, right? I mean, who knows? It'd be a big risk. It'd be
a huge risk. I mean, it sort of happened first and Tough Enough, didn't it? Really, I remember that being the first.
A little bit, yeah.
I mean, this is not me giving my opinion, or it shouldn't be a podcast giving my opinion. It all should be about you. But my opinion, since I've said I won't give it, but I will, is I'd take everybody off Twitter. I would have it a complete closed shop once again. I know it's impossible probably to do that now, but the fact is that I loved not knowing at all, or not really having the access to know what was going on, who really liked who really didn't like who, and what the plan was 3 months in advance. I mean, you can't stop the news
Sure.
as it's happening, but that would be my opinion, is sort of bar everyone from Twitter unless you're almost sort of semi in character, or at least do the. I believe it's Jerry Jarrett who said if you use A, B, and C that are all true, and then you go to D, and that's the work, then people are more likely to at least get invested, if not outright believe D, and then proceed from that. And I always felt that ECW did that very well, or Paul Heyman did that very well.
Yes. Yeah. I agree. I mean, something has to change, and it wouldn't be so far off to think that. I just don't know if anybody has that vision. I think that's what really is happening here, is a lack of real, true ideas and vision. And I thought AEW for sure, like, I have no idea. I'm very ignorant to who runs AEW. Like, I mean, I know obviously Tony Khan, but there's many other people backstage giving ideas and helping write the show and produce the show. I just don't know who they are. But for me, I just find it very, very uninspired is a good word. Like, this is supposed to be, I mean, this is the first time we've had another promotion like this on television on a major network in 20 years. That's a big deal. For a while, I mean, I certainly bought into this could be the saving grace of professional wrestling. Just the fact that there's another alternative for men and women to find work, full-time work, you know, and from what I've seen, it's just like I've been really hard on it because it's been so disappointing and I had such high expectations. But, you know, I think the people over there that are employed by AEW are just they're so inexperienced and they're just so happy to have a job. I don't think they realize how unique and how important their opportunities are. And they're just like, you know, going with the flow. There's not, you know, like Steve Austin always tells the story of how he wasn't getting used. I did a podcast with his, one of his original podcasts for his old show. And he told me, like, you know, when he was the ringmaster, how, you know, WWE was not doing anything with him. And he would literally have to wait till he went on live television, because sometimes Raw would be live one week and then taped the next week just to save money. And Steve would always wait to be on live television to flip the script a little bit and go on his own, because he knew if he did it on the taped show, Vince would edit it. And we just don't have people that are, you know, willing to take chances, that are just kind of willing to go against the grain and do something that they believe in. You know, everybody's just happy to be there. Let's play along. Let's play nice. And let me get my nice paycheck. And that's unfortunately what's happening. And there's a real lack of inspiration for a company that's so new and has a 2-hour show. And quite frankly, is beating the WWE within, you know, on their NXT Wednesday night. So I still don't understand how these guys just don't see how golden this is for them. I just don't see it. You know, it's quite shocking.
It must have been quite an interesting sort of thing to hear that there'd be no less than 4 active wrestlers who would all be vice presidents of a professional wrestling company. Because I'm sure as you started wrestling in the early 90s, all the horror stories of active wrestlers who are booking themselves,
right,
and they always end up on the...
Yeah.
I mean, how did you listen? I know it's a different era and everything, but how do you take that when you first heard it, and has it worked out?
It hasn't. You always get nervous when that happens. I mean, you can't help it. And especially since one of them is, you know, son of Cody, or of Dusty Rhodes, Cody Rhodes. You know, I see a lot of Cody's stuff that he does, booking wise at least, is straight out of the old man's playbook. And I'm not saying that it's all bad, but a lot of what I see in AEW, especially coming from stuff that Cody does himself, is straight out of the Dusty Rhodes playbook. It's alarming, but what alarmed me more was not so much that these guys have this executive producer credit and, let's say, this creative input. To me, what kind of scared me was the lack of experience that a lot of these guys have. I know the Young Bucks were certainly one of them, and Kenny Omega was one of them, and I don't know who else, minus that and Cody, and I don't know, there's probably another one in there, maybe Jericho. But like me, for example, if you gave me any kind of executive producer credit or input, I would be, you know, I'm going on 29 years in this October this year. I'll be 29 years in the business, and I wouldn't feel that I had the knowledge to do it. Right. And I've been everywhere there could be. I've been all over the world, wrestled for WWE on 3 different occasions in the 90s, in the early 2000s, and in 2006 in the rebirth of the fake ECW. And even with all that, and of course being an ECW, TNA, Japan, I still wouldn't feel qualified, because it is such a big deal, and it's not for everybody. Not everybody could write and be creative on television. And for guys with so little experience to be given the keys to the kingdom and produce a 2-hour show with commercial breaks and breaking down segments and really making stuff have to flow, right? This is episodic television. It's no different than watching a good drama on television, supposed to be anyways, where stories and everything kind of intertwines and you leave the fans wanting more, where this is a lot of times the farthest thing from the case. A lot of times these things are contrived, and from the main event picture, which looks at times really fun and good, to, you know, and you put it to compare it to the first opening segment of, you know, and, you know, younger talents, it's like night and day. It's like we're seeing two extremes on a 2-hour show of talents, and they just have a lot of work ahead of them right now to kind of even everything out, you know, because they're really showing their lack of experience, if not a, you know, there's not a better word out there, I don't know, but, and they shouldn't, because they have enough good people there. Tully Blanchard, Arn Anderson, Jerry Lynn, Billy Gunn, you know, I mean, they have a ton of great, Jim Ross, they have a professional crew. I don't know what's up, but I do hear some whisperings that a lot of the younger talent in AEW don't want nothing to hear from the older generation. It's like they feel like they know better, that we're out of touch, and that's it. They're kind of doing their own thing, which I find, I mean, you know, I find weird, because we were always taught to, you know, you don't have to do exactly what the older generation did, but at least take it into consideration and kind of work with it and work, you know, learn from it, not just dismiss it. So, you know. When
you were 1 or 2 years in the business, did you do the same thing? Just completely ignore the advice from the older generation?
Brother, I was scared to talk, even on my second run. After I was ECW champion and I went back to do X Factor, I was still intimidated to say anything to guys like Undertaker or Triple H or stuff like that. You know, maybe to a fault. I played the nice guy and humbled myself. So there's a mix here. There's like, you know, there's somewhere you can meet in between, and you know, you don't have to be extreme to one way or another. But yeah, I showed too much respect for my peers, and these guys aren't showing enough, it seems.
Fair enough then. Are we all right to move on to a bit of news? A bit of local.
Sure.
I mean, how closely you follow the business? I imagine you follow it fairly closely, or at least read the news, and you've got opinions.
Yeah.
Whatever then. Latest is the concussion lawsuit. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce the lawyer's name. Very Greek name, Justin Credible. But he's been going on for years. I don't believe your name was on the class action lawsuit for concussions, was it?
No. No, sir.
And the apparently 5 wrestlers still pressing on with it.
Yeah.
What's fully your opinion?
Well, I mean, the reason I've certainly been asked, and it's just a no-win, these class action lawsuits. I certainly would have, if I thought that I had anything to gain from it, I would have definitely signed on, because I feel that the WWE was very irresponsible in that stuff back in the day. I mean, I remember. What I do remember, it was on television when I wrestled the head shrinkers, the Samoans, as PJ Walker. I took a backdrop, which they pretty much landed me on my head, and then clotheslined me into completely knocked out on live television, to where I did not move. I was literally knocked out live on TV, and they dragged me to my corner, which they shouldn't have moved me at all, to tag in the guy I was working with, and they finished him off. And all I remember is going to the ring that night, and I woke up in my mom's house in her bed, in my childhood bed. So how I got from New York City to Connecticut, which is a 2-hour drive, got paid, got my car, all that stuff is blacked out. So I literally remember going to the ring, waking up at home, don't know how I did it. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So many times you would get knocked out under WWE watch. They knew it and put you right back out there. And that was common practice. Do I have long-term effects? I don't know. I mean, I certainly know that depression is a huge, huge problem that comes with multiple concussions. I've had well over a dozen. So I can't say for sure, but I have suffered from substance abuse, depression, and many other things that kind of go hand in hand with concussions. But I'm not going to say that it's all that. I just don't know. You really don't know. It's such a new thing. But I mean, it's a tricky thing. But I don't think they'll ever go anywhere with it, unfortunately. And it'll just be another win for the WWE. And maybe rightfully so. I don't know. The evidence is just so sparse and all over the place that there's no real case there, other than opinion, no fact.
Yeah. Where do you think the line is drawn between a company's responsibility to their, I'll do the air quotes here, independent contractors, and where the personal onus is on the risk?
I think it's our responsibility as performers, but it was always, they say you have a choice, but you really don't. Believe me, if I would have said at 20, 21 years of age, after getting knocked out, I'm not going to be at the next show, I probably wouldn't have a next show. You know what I mean? And I probably, they wouldn't have ever said that or admitted it, but they would just move on from you. And that was very well known in some circles. You couldn't call in sick. You had to make it no matter what. And that's what we did, and that's, but again, there's no proof of that. They always said the right thing. But in no way, shape, or form were we to know. It's just, the proof is in the pudding, I guess, because the guys that would take time and if they got hurt just wouldn't come back, Because if you weren't important enough, I should say, to come back, then you weren't coming back. If you were a superstar, then that's a different tale.
Yeah.
So.
Right. A couple more news things, and then I'm probably going to go on to like some of your old career and all that kind of thing. So if that's all right. Two more questions. And this sort of touches back on what we were talking about AEW with all the legends coming in. I was listening to an old Wrestling Observer radio, saying an old one, a new one, maybe a week ago, and they did an average age of the upcoming Elimination Chamber pay-per-view, and I'm not sure, there was either one under 40 or no one under 40. Where do you stand on just how basically old the main event talent roster is on WWE these days, and how big of a problem is it? I mean, because they're all names. Are they just harkening back to the past too much?
I don't know. I think they are harkening back to the past a bit much, but what I see is a bigger issue than that, because once they do NXT for 4 or 5 years, they're getting these young people, in their early 30s perhaps, but it seems like they do NXT for a good 5 years, some of them. And by the time you finish all that, God forbid injuries, you're already in your mid to late 30s, right? Before you get that experience and all of that. So I would say right now it's probably closer to 40s that where all these guys stand at. The Daniel, I don't know who's in the Elimination Chamber, but I could just say, the Randy Ortons, the Daniel Bryans. I don't know if Edge is in it or not, but everybody is closer to 40 than anything else. So but that's always kind of been the case in pro wrestling, because it does take so long to kind of master that craft. It's not like sports, where, a 23-year-old phenom basketball player can just take over because of pure athleticism. Pro wrestling is so different because, it's mentally like, you got to learn psychology and so many different layers to the business, learning your promos and such, that it usually you find your success much later in your career. I don't see it as a huge problem because they're not on the road as much, and they certainly have much better medical care these days than they did maybe 10 or 15 years ago. But for long-term planning and stuff like that, I could see that being a bit of an issue. Sure.
Fair enough. And last question, and this is more overarching, I suppose, because I'm always interested in what people think. Were you ever, in your active, or shall I say full-time active wrestling days, a big industry insider newsletter reader? And how did you feel about PWTorch, Wrestling Observer? Did you feel they were basically lifting the curtain, ruining it for everybody, or were you more interested to learn the inner workings and the TV ratings and all that kind of thing?
Yeah, I liked him. I mean, I always had relationships with a lot of those guys. I spoke to Dave Meltzer, Jason Powell, Wade Keller. Quite frankly, a lot. In those days, not necessarily divulging anything, but just talking shop. It was common at times to just really, if you wanted to find out what was going on, how the numbers were. So it was kind of like our industry paper. Like on Hollywood, they have industry papers that tell you about numbers and directors and
Variety.
who's hiring for what exactly. Billboard magazine for music. To me it was no different. The biggest problem I think was that fans had gotten I think really gravitated to that, and when that Pandora's box opened, everybody kind of went there and really kind of fell in love with that. So I could see where the problem lies a little bit, because it's almost like, people always say spoiler alert, but I think fans really like to know those things. It's like they feel like, oh, I know something that my buddy doesn't know, and stuff like that. So I think they really dig on knowing the inner workings themselves, but I think that's natural too, because if I like a movie or I like a certain band, I don't mind knowing what happened to them on tour or something like that, if you hear a couple of stories. So I'm guilty, I must say. So, I don't mind it.
Fair enough then. A couple of, I suppose it's not really news so much anymore, and I'm not sure how well you would have got to know Pat Patterson, because I believe when you were doing enhancement work for the WWF, he'd left after the Tom Cole problems, accusations, and he wasn't really full time then. So by the time you left the WWF in mid-97, he was sort of only just coming back. But do you have any memories of Pat Patterson? Any words?
Oh yeah, no, I actually got to know Pat quite well. When I was there in '94 to work with Brian Lee when we did the fake Undertaker, he was one of the reasons I got my job, because I was, being from Connecticut, the office is in Connecticut. I was brought in to work with Mark, Undertaker Mark, and Brian Lee in Stamford, just us three in a ring. And then Friday was the dress rehearsal. So Vince McMahon and Pat Patterson came down to watch Brian Lee in full Undertaker, makeup and gear, do his walkthrough with me. And after it was done, Pat Patterson came into the ring and was like, started asking me questions. I go, who trained you? And I said, well, the Harts, and I was trained up in Calgary. And he was like, oh, okay. And he goes, what nationality are you? And I said, I'm Portuguese. And Pat goes to Vince. He goes, hey, Vince, this kid's Portuguese. And Vince kind of, popped a little bit. And then Pat talked to me a little more. And he's like, do you speak it, kid? And I said, yes, sir, I do. My parents came to this country in 1970, so I learned Portuguese before English. And oh my God, Vince, this kid speaks Portuguese. And I was like, okay, that's kind of weird. I didn't know where they were going with it, but the whole thing being, they were looking for someone to fill the Aldo Montoya character the whole time. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. So Pat actually, through the years, even though he was part-time and only really did TV and pay-per-views at times, he was very instrumental, and he was a good friend. And I remember fondly when we were in Montreal one night, I'd say in 2001, after a SmackDown, me, him, and The Rock went to a little karaoke bar, and we all sang. Rock did Devil Went Down to Georgia. Pat Patterson did My Way by Frank Sinatra. And I did Kid Rock's Only God Knows Why. So have some fond memories with Pat. He was a great man.
Right, so pre-WWF, so always in Connecticut. Were you born in Connecticut?
Yes.
So
born and raised, yep.
Right, so was it just WWF you were raised on, or do you get cable, and who are your favorites?
I did get cable, and I started watching WCW, NWA at the time. To me, my favorites were always Ric Flair, Ricky Steamboat, Terry Funk. Those are the Four Horsemen. Those were my go-to guys back then. But also, the first match I ever really paid attention to and watched was like Hulk Hogan beating the Iron Sheik. and just going to my dad used to take me to house shows for the WWF here, where they were still doing high schools, like little high school gymnasiums, and I would watch Tony Atlas and Rocky Johnson against the Samoans, and like that, and, in a little gym in front of 500 people. So it was really all over the place. My love for it really came from the magazines. I used to love getting the Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazines, and just looking at the pictures was so amazing, because you didn't know a lot of the guys you saw on those things you didn't watch on television. So like seeing Carlos Colon versus Abdullah the Butcher all bloodied up from Puerto Rico, I was like, it captured your imagination. It's like, oh my God, what are these guys doing to each other, and just so much cool stuff. And back then they took it so much like a sport. It would say, Bruiser Brody banned in, Kansas City. Like, what does that even mean? He was like so tough that he got banned from wrestling there. Like, oh my God, what, did he try to kill someone? You believe that stuff because it was just done so great. And when you're a little kid while looking at that stuff, it was like, whoa. So yeah, that was all over the map, but those are usually my favorites.
So it's a slightly different question. Who went on television that you looked at as a teenager or whatever, and you said, he's doing it, I can do it?
That's a good one. That's a really good one. Brian Pillman. Brian Pillman. I loved Brian Pillman. And back then, like, we were talking about earlier, wrestlers then were so big. They were so larger than life. And I remember I'm like 6 foot tall, and in high school, I'm a lot bigger now, just the wrong kind of big, fat. But back in high school, I was maybe 200 pounds. And I figured, Brian Pillman, he was around my height, and his weight, his wrestling weight was 225, which of course was probably a work, but I didn't know that. So I was like, well, I could do it, because everybody was so big. And I'm like, if I can get myself up to 225, I can do this, because, he was small, but back then, if you were that small, which isn't small today, you had to fly around. So the early days of PJ Walker, I was doing, little planches to the floor and cross bodies and drop kicks off the top, and just trying to be a flyer, which ended up being nothing like what I ended up doing. But back then, that's what you really had to do to try to fit in, or so I thought, But yeah, Brian Pillman was definitely one of them.
So how did you end up going to the Hart Wrestling Camp? Because I believe, obviously, there was no internet and there weren't that many wrestling schools around. But I believe like the Monster Factory was probably nearer to you. So how can you end up going to How can you end up going to the Hart place?
I didn't know any better, and those magazines once again came into play. I worked at a grocery store, kind of bagging groceries, getting the carts, the carriages, whatever you call them. And during my 15-minute break, I would go to the magazine aisle and, look at the latest wrestling magazines. And I had graduated high school. And while I was reading, in the back, there was a full-page ad that said, Hart Brothers, Dare to Be Great. And it showed a picture of a young Bret Hart, a young Owen Hart, Keith Hart, Bruce Hart. And I think there was a picture of Brian Pillman in there too, because he'd gone through the Calgary territories. And I was like, this is it. Because now I finally got a phone number, right? Because I didn't know anybody in the business, or there was no, internet then. So I literally called someone, and they answered. Somebody actually answered, and it was Bruce Hart. I spoke to him for a couple of hours, and for about 6 months, I exchanged calls and saved up enough money. And lo and behold, man, the summer of '92, I had paid 2,500 Canadian and got myself an airplane ticket to go to Calgary. And they put me up in this shady motel in the middle of nowhere with a couple of other kids that were coming in. And when I got there, I realized that the Harts weren't really going to be the ones training. Like, they'd show up, Keith Hart would show up once a week, barely, and then get in the ring with you for a minute and like kick your ass. But Lance Storm, who was there the year before, and Jericho and those guys would come through, and kind of mostly Storm though would come through and train you. So, and Lance was great, actually. He was one of the best things that could have happened to me, because he really had patience. And even though he was still young in the game, he understood it very well. And there was a rich culture of guys that would just show up to get ring time. You know what I mean? So you'd end up learning from a bunch of different people. So it was actually at the end of the day, even though it wasn't, I wasn't getting trained by the Harts, I still was able to kind of use the Hart name. And it was more, you know what I mean? It was more show than anything else. But hey, I paid the Harts that money, so to hell, I'm going to use that name. And and that's what it was. But it was a great experience. You know, it really was. You know, a very cool experience, and I wouldn't trade it for the world.
So, did you ever get in the ring with Bruce, even for a minute? Did you even see him?
Not Bruce. Nope. Bruce, no. But Keith Hart was, I must say, was there once a week, and he would always come in the ring and do drills with you, where you know, give you hip tosses and body slams, and you know. There were nuts enough people. I can't say anything negative, but certainly wasn't as advertised. Let's just say that.
Fair enough then. So obviously you get trained and you do the nascent independents, I suppose, because the territories have gone, smaller independents are around. Who was the biggest star, the first big star that you ever wrestled on the independents, maybe on the way down, that you learned something from, or maybe they were a total dick?
Sure. My career was actually really small on the independents. What happened when I was done with the Hearts in '92, I came back home, and the people in Calgary were starting a promotion called Rocky Mountain Pro Wrestling. And the first show was October 9th, I'd like to say. I'll never forget it. Or no, lying. October 16th, because it was my 19th birthday. And I flew all the way to Calgary, and I had a 10-week ticket because they were going to be running weekly shows in Calgary. So I figured I can go there and cut my teeth. My first match was against some kid that I went to wrestling school with, who still wrestles out of Ontario, Brett Farrell, who wrestles as Big Daddy Hammer. Never really made a name for himself. But I also wrestled, you know, in those 10 matches, I wrestled Jericho. I wrestled a young Lance Storm, Jerry Morrow, who'd wrestled in Calgary Stampede and New Japan. But just guys like that, nobody of real fame. And then I came home, and I maybe did 3 or 4 shows on the independents, where I finally went to a WWE house show just as one of the boys. I showed up with my gear, as they always tell you to do. And, you know, I told Tony Gurria was there. He was the producer on hand, or agent. And I asked him if he needed anybody, whatever. And he said, no, we're good for tonight, but you could watch the show here. I told him I was trained by the Hearts in Calgary. And of course, they didn't need me. I watched the show. So afterward, they just go to say goodbye and say thank you for the hospitality. And he goes, well, you know, you're from Connecticut. I said, yeah. He goes, well, we're starting a new show in Manhattan called Monday Night Raw. He goes, we're going to need some extras if you want to come and do a couple jobs for us. So they had me come in a couple weeks from that date. And my first match was against the narcissist Lex Luger. And from that moment on, I literally started getting called up almost on a weekly basis to do Raws and WWF TV, and maybe a couple of indies in between. I probably had 20 indie matches before I got signed by the WWE, believe it or not.
Really?
You know, and yeah, and it was just being in the right place at the right time at that moment. You know, it's very unique, and I was very, very lucky. You know. So
did you, while you were signed by WWF, let's say early '93, or were we talking late '92 here? Around
94.
That. Oh, sorry,
August of 94.
Yep. So in that year and a half from, or maybe it's 2 years, isn't it? So from the Hart Camp to WWF, I mean, how many independent shows were you getting maybe a week, as well as enhancement talent for the WWF?
A week?
Or are we talking months?
Oh, probably maybe once a month.
Wow.
Once a month, maybe, because there wasn't a lot here. Yeah, because I did, you know, I would do anything in Massachusetts, New York, Pennsylvania, but there wasn't, back then, there wasn't a lot. It wasn't like it is today where there's so much wrestling. Back then, it really was very tight, you know, because the community was still so small, you know what I mean? Without the internet, you know, you get a hold of people. There's so many shows. Back then, you really only had 2 or 3 indie shows in the area, and you had to know somebody, right? You'd have to know the promoter, and it was usually somebody that ran a school, and, you know, it was like pay to play. You'd have to, you know, be part of their little scheme to get booked, you know? So it was very difficult in those days. You know, I'm actually very surprised. because this horror stories I hear that I didn't have to go to another wrestling school here, because what they normally do is you go to a wrestling school in the area and then they put on shows which allow you to work and be seen. So I had no connections here. That was my biggest mistake. Well, not mistake, but the biggest problem I had going to Calgary. I knew everybody out there, not over here in my home area. So, if I hadn't gone to the WWE house show just as a chance I took, I don't think I would have ever had the career. It was just one moment where I got lucky. I always say that right place, right time is the only reason I made it.
So we're looking at about 18 months worth of low on the card, getting beaten by all the stars and everything. Yep. And we touched on this slightly before. You mentioned Fatu and Samu. I was going to ask you, who were the most reckless people you ever got in the ring with? Who sort of didn't bother taking care of your body as they could have done to enhance their own career? And similarly, who were the best? Who were the most giving and most thankful for your work?
Yeah. Wow. I don't know. I really didn't have, I don't want to say anybody because I really never had other than, and the Samoans weren't even that bad. I just got caught with a bad shot. But I'll say this. There were these two guys that were getting a tryout called the Headhunters out of Puerto Rico. Big guys. They both looked like Abdullah the Butcher. And myself as Aldo and Al Snow as Avatar were wrestling them in a dark match in somewhere in Vermont. And I know that they strayed away from the finish. They were supposed to get beat by us. And instead, they wouldn't get in the ring. We did a couple of dives to the outside and they refused to get in the ring. So the referee had to DQ us. So I would say them. We're definitely one of them. And also Mantar. I don't know if you're familiar with Mantar. He was brutal in the ring. He would almost always hit you. Razor used to wrestle him all the time, and he would call one of his moves the career ender because it was like every night he would just it was brutal. So those guys were definitely some of the worst and some of the best. Let me see, who did I really love?
Probably also
with?
Maybe the most appreciative. Oh, thank you so much for
Oh yeah. Yeah. Wow. Now I really want to think because I just don't want to give a BS answer. Frick. Hold on. I gotta think this through now. You can edit this. I want to be right about this. The Steiners, believe it or not, were very, very good to me. Very appreciative and also very safe. A lot of people don't believe it, but they were definitely there. Kurt Hennig, Mr. Perfect, was another one. And Owen. Owen was also very, very appreciative and very, very easy on me. So I would say those guys definitely.
Did Scott Steiner ever walk up to you and say, "Do you fancy taking the Steiner Screwdriver tonight?" And you went, maybe tomorrow, maybe tomorrow?
Nope. I was the first guy to take that.
Never.
And I remember where it was. I took it. I was the first time he'd ever done it was in Poughkeepsie, New York, 1993 or 94. And he asked me, he goes, could we try this in the back? And there was a very big mattress, like a gym mat, like those big crash pad ones, like 2-3 feet of cushion. And he threw me up and did it. He goes, how does that feel? I said, feels fine. Let's do it. And believe me, I never touched the canvas with my head. He protected me 100%. That's why I say that, because they were so scary. But they were that darn good because they were so big and strong. They really could hold you and protect you. It just looked wicked on television. But yeah, believe it or not, if you go back and look in history, I was the first unfortunate soul it looked like to take that move. But it wasn't. I'll tell you, he took good care of me, and it wasn't bad. I'd do it again if I had to.
Fair enough. I've also got to ask the Owen Hart rib, and I'm going to cheap plug myself. I've written a book. Oh, I haven't even put it in the back. Never mind. I wrote a book all about Owen Hart ribs. I collated over 160 of them from various podcasts and interviews, and I never heard one from you. You must have one.
Well, it's really, it's really not that great. I just remember with me, he would always he would always do the one where, we check into, especially when we go to, England or Europe, anywhere, Germany, we'd get in various hours of the morning. And back then when we'd go overseas, there'd be a long list of, for the hotels, what room everybody was with their real names. And he would literally call everyone as we're exhausted, tired, just pulling in to the hotel, trying to get some rest from wherever we're flying in from after a show. And he'd always call you and, asked if you wanted breakfast, and of course you would be like, no, I'm good. I don't want anything. And you'd hang up and he'd call right back immediately and be like, so would you like toast with that? Or would you like jam? Or, and he'd go on and on. So for me, that was the only one he'd really do to me. He had a soft spot for me, believe it or not. Owen did. So I didn't get a lot of ribs from Owen, thank God.
Fair enough then. It's still a good story, and do you know what? I believe, I know because I did the research for it. Triple H says the exact same one. He gave the exact same example. Would you? And he'd always affect an English accent. Hello, sir. Would you?
Always, yes. He always had. Yep. I wasn't going to do it because I do a horrible British accent, but he certainly always did that. It was great, hilarious.
Right, dude. That's it. That's our time. That's an hour, man.
Yeah. Okay.
Dude, thank you so much. Thank you so much for doing this. I know we.
Oh, thank you.
I know
You're very kind.
Yeah, we messed around, but before we go, let's have some plugs. We all got to do some plug-in, and let's hear it. What you have to plug in, man?
Sure. Just follow me on Twitter at PJ Polaco, and of course on Instagram at PJ Polaco, and ProWrestlingTees.com / Justin Credible. I have over 20 designs. So if you're into some cool retro, pro wrestling shirts, check that out.
Thank you very much. And this is James signing off. James's Wrestling Shoot Interviews. Thank you very much for joining us. Peace out.